I've seen some real horror stories with teams pitching and presenting over the years. And the single biggest reason that team pitches and team presentations go wrong is that there's a lack of a common goal, a lack of a clear outcome and goal for everybody. Everybody, if you like, is doing their own bit. And it's like hearing 5 different musicians playing different pieces of music rather than some people who've rehearsed in a band or a chamber music piece. So what typically happens in a team pitch or presentation is the big boss, the partner, the chief exec, they get rolled out to do their ambassadorial stuff. Then the project leader will do their bit, and then they hand over to somebody from ops who does their bit, and somebody from finance who does their bit, and then there may or may not be a few questions, and finally everyone looks at the team leader who says, I think that's it. Well, on our last slide, that says, thank you very much for coming today. We look forward to hearing from you. And it's fine, it's all right, but it could be so much better, and it could be so much better easily. So here are the easy things you can do when you're next putting together a team pitch or a team presentation. First of all, you must get everybody on board with a common goal. Now, if you've been watching my videos, you'll know I'm very keen on a goal being phrased as, what do we want the audience to do as a result of this pitch or as a result of this presentation? So in other words, do you want the audience to ask questions? Do you want the audience to refer you to somebody else internally? Do you want the audience to agree to a second pitch or a second presentation? Whatever that is, everybody has to be really clear what that goal is. And you mustn't let people on the team just do their thing, because their thing may or may not be relevant to the audience. It may or may not be relevant or indeed support the overall goal of the pitch or presentation. What I strongly recommend that you do is do this in a consultative way rather than bullying people and saying, here is the goal, you must adhere to it. It's much better to talk through with your team members who the audience are, what the audience needs to get out of this, what the result needs to be, so that everybody feels invested in the goal. Now, if you do just that one thing, if everyone on your team knows what the goal is and they know how their piece contributes to the overall goal, you'll be much better than most teams pitching and presenting already. So that really is the single most important thing to do. The second most important thing is, and here's a word everybody hates, rehearse. You must rehearse. Now, let me tell you what most people think rehearsing is. Most people think rehearsing is turning to their colleague and saying, John, I'm going to do my bit on finance. I think you're going to do your bit on operations. And John says, yeah, I'm doing my bit on operations. How long will that be? Oh, maybe 10 minutes. Great. Okay. And then we'll hand over to Mary, who's going to wrap up with some questions. That, my friends, is not rehearsal. That's barely even planning. Right? That's discussion. That's discussing what you're going to do. Rehearsal really means going through it in real time. And I know everybody hates it. I know everybody is resistant to it. But if your pitch or your presentation matters, you have to do it. Right? You have to start with a timer on you. Everybody does their piece one after the other, and you have to rehearse it. You have to keep going through the mistakes. You have to keep going through the awkward bits. And this is why rehearsal is magic, because you've only got 2 choices. You either rehearse in advance with each other, or you rehearse in front of your client or your important audience. They're your only 2 choices. So you may as well do it in advance. And although everybody hates it, I promise once you've done it 3 times, everybody's so much more relaxed. Everybody knows so much more about what the pitch or presentation is about. If you're going to focus on one thing in the rehearsing and stitching this pitch or presentation together, focus on the handovers between people, because this is where you can become so much better very, very quickly. What I mean by the handover is, in a typical pitch or presentation, everybody's sitting there and Jane finishes her piece and she says, oh, okay, well, that's the end of my piece, which is about strategy. I'm going to hand over to Jenny now. I think Jenny's going to talk about how we can finance this. Jenny? And Jenny says, oh, thank you very much. Yes, I'm going to talk about how we can finance this. And again, that's all right, but gosh, it's so boring. If you rehearse the handover so that it's smooth, then the person you're handing over knows that it's coming, so they're ready, they're prepared, they don't get taken by surprise. But also it gives you the chance to build up their bit. So for example, instead of saying, I'm going to hand over to Jane who's going to talk about finance, you might be able to say, so I think this strategy sounds great. I think we're all in agreement that we're going to follow this strategy. The big question, of course, is where's the money going to come from? Where's the funding going to come from? How quickly do we have to get the funding? I'm going to hand over to Jane because she's got some really interesting answers to those kinds of questions. we hand over to Jane. Now, it's just a tiny change, but that's instantly more interesting for the audience. It's more intriguing for the audience. You've presented them with a few unanswered questions that they might have been thinking for themselves. And you're setting Jane up to succeed rather than be boring. And Jane can pick that up, of course, and she can say, thanks, those are really interesting questions. Actually, there's another question I'd like to start with, and she can bring in something new and varied and unique of her own and keep the interest going. All right, so practice the handovers, because if handovers look smooth, if they're polished, they can really make a huge difference to how the team pitch or presentation works. And then finally, we come to probably what's going to happen near the end, which is questions. And here, again, team pitches and presentations can fall apart. They can become a bit muddied. They can become a bit unclear. So what I recommend that you do with your team is a couple of things. First of all, you can assign question roles in advance, and this will usually be very obvious. So you can say things like, well, you'll deal with the finance questions, I'll deal with the strategy questions, somebody else will deal with the branding questions or whatever. You can let each person know in advance and be really strict with yourselves that that person answers the questions. Don't jump in and don't correct them and so on. Or you can, and this works really well if there are quite a few people in the team and quite a few people in the audience, you can have one person who is the, if you like, the question compere, all right, the question host. So that's somebody on your team, and their job is to take the questions from the audience, repeat the question from the audience, and then decide who on your team answers the question. And there are some real benefits to doing this. First of all, it helps your team look really polished and really professional. Secondly, when the question compere repeats the question, it gives the team a bit of time to think about how they would answer the question. And then, of course, you hand over, the question compere hands over to somebody. So the way that it would work is, let's say the audience says, well, that all sounds very good in theory, but can you really get this done in 3 months? The question compere takes the question and says, that's a great question, thank you very much. Can we, obviously the theory sounds great, can we get this done in 3 months? Well, I think Peter is the perfect person to answer this question. Peter, what would you say? All right, so that's the role of the question compere, not to answer the questions themselves, but to give the team a bit of breathing space and then field the questions out. All right, my friends, that's some of the really top ideas on getting your team pitches and presentations together. As always, there's loads more we can go into in detail, and I'll make a few more videos around this theme as well. If you need any help with that, and you've got a bit of money, obviously get in touch. I'm always delighted to hear from you. Have a very good rest of the day wherever you are.